Welcome back to the CMO Summit. Before we get going with the next helping of inspiring content, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content from articles and interviews to our podcast series at cmoalliance.io. Enjoy the next session. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the CMO Summit. I'm really pleased to introduce our next speakers today, Andrea and Greg. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello folks, hi Greg. So today in this frank fireside chat, Greg and I are going to debunk some of the classic myths about what divides marketers and finance professionals and discuss how we can live in that new middle. Greg, do you want to start with telling us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, no problem at all, Andrea. Hopefully it's not too frank today. We'll keep some things in the cupboard, but my name is Greg Stafford. I'm CFO of a company called Clever Cards. My history, I suppose, and experience to date, I started off in the exciting accountancy world of KPMG for a number of years. And as opposed to being a professional auditor, I went out into the real world and started work in the telecommunications sector across companies like Vodafone, Hutchison, Whampoa. And then I ended up in the entertainment retail kind of gambling sector with Paddy Power, which is now Flutter PLC. And then I got my first gig as a CFO in a biotech enterprise, which was using artificial intelligence to discover novel peptides in food that would either prevent or treat a disease. And I scaled that company up from about 7 people to over 60 people, raised about 60 million euro, and it was based in Ireland, but with a global outlook. After getting the startup bug, I then moved into where I am today, which is in the fintech space with a company called Clever Cards. So Clever Cards as a company, what we do and our mission, and it's great to be talking to marketeers about mission because I'm very mission driven myself. Our mission here in Clever Cards is to make it possible for anyone, anytime, anywhere to be paid by a corporation or a government. And how we do that is by delivering an email or a SMS text message. So we send via email or SMS a digital prepaid MasterCard, and you can use that for your purposes. So that's where I am today, and it's an exciting scaling journey as well. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context of who I am and how I answer some of these questions today.
Thanks, Greg. Well, I have to say, either you have a savvy marketer in your background who prepped you on that today, or you're a marketer's dream, because there's not many CFOs who can reel off the product and service so succinctly. So fair play. And for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Andrea Lynn. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Currency Fair. And I should shout out, we're about to announce a major rebrand within hours, actually. So super excited for that. We are also a fintech. A little bit like Greg, I was in a number of other industries before I found my way here. But you'll be delighted to know that this is not all about the perspective of a CMO and a CFO from the fintech realm. We've a broad range of industries as our backgrounds. So all of our experience will feed into what we chat about today. So with that being said, this is the CMO Summit. So it is the majority of marketers that we're among. So it would be good, Greg, to start off with, you sharing some insights on how the role of the CFO has evolved and how it aligns with modern-minded CMOs and marketers like those who are in our audience today.
Yeah, Andrea, it's a great question. I suppose it's historically when I would have started out or even going through college, the traditional CFO was historic looking. What happened in the past and how do we present that to external shareholders? It was all about that historical performance. And I think that's gone well by the wayside now. I don't think it's realistic in this fast moving world that we are to keep looking in the rearview mirror. So ultimately, I'd say to really summarize how it's changed is it's gone from looking in the past to being more future looking. And the way I kind of like to set up the teams around me and the vision around me is why we're doing something, how will it impact on our performance, and what do we need to do to succeed. So it's ultimately the why, what's the mission, the objective of the company. then it's how is this going to impact the bottom line, and it might not be the bottom line. You got to think about ESG stuff now as well. So what's the actual impact on the performance of the company? And then there's the point around, if we want to deliver this, what do we need to do to succeed? So to wrap that up into a summary answer, it's gone from historical to the future looking, and really thinking about the business and thinking about the resources and the levers that need to be pulled to succeed and achieve that mission. So I think they're chalk and cheese, really, that traditional stereotype of the CFO to what one should be today.
Yeah, and I can echo that. I've certainly witnessed that myself. And like you and I have chatted before, that we've historically had CEOs who happen to have come through the finance track. All my CEOs have always been CFOs, and I can absolutely see the difference from 15, 20 years ago from the perspective now that CFO turned CEO or sitting CFO has. But it's, you talk about the future in particular, and this is probably one of the most challenging things we have as marketers, is that dilemma between conflicting short-term metrics and those long-term goals. So, it's business valuation, revenue growth, profitability. They all have different cadences in terms of achievement and strategies that go behind actually achieving them. And sometimes you got to make trade-offs in the short term to achieve those longer term business valuations. So what's your perspective as a CFO when it comes to those kinds of trade-offs?
Yeah, I think ultimately a bit of it comes back to the stage of growth of the company. So as a company, let me take historical experience coming from a company of 5 people where it was all about minimum viable product and raising money. We cannot think too far in the future because you'll run out of cash. So you have to balance it between the stage at which the company is at. If it is very early stage, yes, it's great to have the mission and to be North Star driven, but you have to bring that back to, well, how am I going to prove this concept to get, whether it's capital involved or to get that first customer? So you have to think at the stage as you move on. Thankfully, in Clever Cards, we're nearly at a stage now where we've got a good customer base coming through. We have that ability to look a little bit further ahead, so you can afford to invest in a project that might have a greater than 12-month payback. The earlier you are, you can't. So to answer your question, Andrea, I think it comes back, the way I look at this from a value perspective is, I have limited capital available. I know the requirement that we have as a business is X. How best to deploy those limited resources to get that minimum viable product, or for the long term? It depends on the stage of growth of the company.
I agree with that completely. And actually, I found scenarios, having that narrative as a marketer around trading off on those short-term wins or short-term objectives for the greater good of the long term is really important. And speaking that language and being able to justify why you're willing to put something to a side, or short-term achievements to the side, to get to that end goal, which could be 2-3 years away. Yeah. It's really important. And I do think that's where we're probably not the strongest traditionally, is being able to have that that conversation and that narrative with CFOs and then ultimately CEOs around that. So there's...
I jump in there probably. Sorry for cutting across, Andrea, but I'd probably jump in on there and say, I think as there's always probably a challenge between marketing, sales, and bottom line performance. And I think, the way I would like it's to be part of a team that has a unified objective. So as long as we're all clear on what the end objective is, well, then we should all be rowing in the same direction. And whether everyone's objectives, personal and company, should have a mix of that short-term deliverable, because you want to get that motivation, you want to get that success factor, and the long-term challenge. So when, if I've taken previous experience, people would have come to me and said, Greg, I want to do a clinical trial that's going to last 5 years. And the results are highly unlikely, but we need to invest 5 million, let's say. That's an interesting one for me to think of and go, okay, so you want me to put 5 million up with limited chance of success here. How do you balance that? But then the commercial people will say, Greg, if that's successful, the upside is huge. So you have to play a balance, and you have to come back to the objective of the company and what it's trying to achieve and deliver.
And do you think that balance tends to be across businesses that you've had experience in before? I can definitely speak to, we set that tone at the top. We set those ultimate business objectives very high level, but they can often go skewed when they go down along the ways. And I think there's a big responsibility on us to make sure that there is absolute lateral visibility, that making sure that all across all departments and teams, that those same objectives at a strategic level are being translated into operational and tactical KPIs and plans that are still all speaking to each other laterally. And I actually feel that that's where the major divide does happen, is when it starts to move down along.
Yeah, and Andrea, there's a concept that's kind of come in, and when I was in Paddy Power, kind of would have been touched on this initially, the concept of business partnering. Would have come in, where you're putting a finance person beside the business, beside the marketing, beside the sales, beside the inverted commas, the kind of the cool part of the business, let's call it. Okay, they're not, accounting people are not being left in the dark shadows. So partner up with the business to understand what the customer is saying, because they're the one who pay our salaries at the end of the day. Understand what the customer is saying, understand what product needs are out there. And then we can build a case together to either invest in this campaign or invest in this product. But if you have silos in an organization where you keep the accountants and their calculators over to one side and everyone else, you're not going to be able to align objectives. And I think that's a fundamental piece that I like to drive personally, is you bring skills from different teams together to make sure that you have this unified objective.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a bit about that cultural divide in a moment. Back to the point you're making there around data. There's almost been like this avalanche of data that's been available to us, this holy grail, and all of a sudden there is all the answers we'll ever need about where to invest our resources, people, or budget, or otherwise, is all of a sudden black and white. But it really isn't. And oftentimes I find data can be the sword that marketers live or die by. And I'm not a big fan of how far we're going on that, because we're losing essentially that gut feeling that we're having to rely on, which I know you mentioned before. So how do you think data has maybe helped or hindered the CMO or CFO divide?
Yeah, I think sometimes we can wait for... I've never been in a circumstance where I've had 100% of data available to make a decision. You have to get that 80-20 rule, I suppose, in place. So you have to get, and it comes back to having the team together. So if there's a general consensus in the room that this is the right thing to do, we might not have all the data available to point towards it. Sometimes you got to make that decision, that good decision to go with it. And you stand over the decision. But I think it comes back to having the check-ins, having the data available where you can quickly identify if it's going off track. So if we said a product launch was going to deliver X sales over the next 12 months, we don't wait until month 12. We're quickly checking and identifying whether it's week 1, week 4, whatever it may be. We have clear markers that we're setting along the path to success that we can say, okay, we need to take corrective action here. And that corrective action is driven by the data that's presented. So yeah, there's been a massive evolution in data, but it's how we're now using it needs to be more real time. And I know internally here we're building a lot of dashboards, but ultimately I come back to what's the key metrics. There's only probably 2, 3, 4, or 5 key metrics. There's not 100 different dashboards I need, guys. So whether that's monthly users, monthly active users, my ARR, whatever it might be for each business, sometimes we try to develop all these metrics to believe we're being successful. You only need a handful of metrics that will keep you on track for that longer term success.
I absolutely agree. And with that, I find it interesting because, we're never going to have all the answers. There's always going to need to use experience, the team's experience, your own experience, to be able to explain why that gut feeling is right, or explain why You intuitively know it's the right way to go. And I found that it's interesting with marketers versus finance professionals, Greg, because if you as the CFO was to say, look, my gut feeling is we should go and invest in these trials versus the CMO saying it, there's an element, there's definitely a disconnect in terms of the credibility that goes along with a CFO's gut feeling and a CMO's gut feeling. And that's the branding of the profession, I think, and it's something we're still trying to change the narrative on. So if you were to give some advice to marketers on how they speak to a wider team of professionals from lots of different disciplines about that unknown piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, but ultimately, it's about probably stepping in the shoes of the other person. I'll give an example at the moment. We're working with, we've acquired an entity in Italy subject to Central Bank of Italy approval. I'm not Italian. I'm not a compliance person, but I have to try and understand, one, the Italian concept, and two, the compliance aspect. So I kind of try to embed myself in both of those aspects and look at it from their shoes. So if I was a marketing person looking at it from, well, what's the CFO historically driven by? Well, he's going to be worried about the cash. He's going to be worried, or she's going to be worried about the resources that are going to be deployed on this. She's going to be worried about the timeline it takes. So step into their shoes to understand some of the simple, maybe obvious things, but there's no harm in that. Like most CFOs are normal, general people. Like, we're all, that's at the end of the day. So I would just step in their shoes and try to address the question from their perspective. At least it shows a willingness to understand their objectives.
And the irony of that, right? Yeah, no. The irony of that, it's like telling marketers how to suck eggs, right? Or teaching them how to suck eggs, because we do this every day for our customers. But you're absolutely right. We sometimes forget to apply our same expertise to the stakeholders within our business, and actually looking at the finance department and looking at them from a persona perspective. What are the pain points of the people at the different levels? What are the professional, personal pain points? How can I help them to help me? And again, this is going into that cultural divide bit. It's about trying to, you might never fully speak the same language. And, certainly there's no expectation that marketers go out and become qualified finance professionals or vice versa.
There's too many of them out there already.
There's way too many of them. But there is effort required on both sides. Now, I will call out, and I know we chatted about this before, it's incredibly interesting that there is finance for non-finance managers and finance for marketers, and learn the ABCs of it forever. But what you don't ever see out there is marketing for non-marketing people. And you certainly don't see marketing for finance professionals that often. I'm sure it exists, but it's certainly not the norm. So what are your thoughts, perspectives on that cultural divide?
I think it works both ways there. I think some people want to stay as this, okay? They just want to stay, they don't have that growth mindset, I suppose. And you got to work within those boundaries, and you got to position it as to, well, if you understand the marketing concept more, your own job will be simpler, or you will, it will be more efficient for you. Ultimately, it comes back to leadership from the top, and if it's seen that the leadership team are not united, like if I was standing up, Andrea, and you're not there beside me backing up what's been said, or I'm not backing up what you're saying, and it's clear from the top that there's no unity, well then why would the rest of the team do so? So simple things like having a lunch and learn, like it's such a simple, but I don't know if this concept was brought in a few years ago by marketers probably, and it's a brilliant concept. It's absolutely amazing, where I can go sit with someone in the marketing team or in the sales team and know what their pain points are. They can go sit with me and go, oh, is that what you do? Jeez, that's a bit weird. So that understanding of each other's day-to-day roles, it's a two-way thing. I know when I'm looking for hires and looking for people to work with me, the first thing I say to them is, worry about the numbers second, worry about the business first. So get to know the business. So to your point around the cultural divide, I think it really is it's an ownership of the leadership team in any organization to ensure that there is no cultural divide. And that then festers throughout the business to say, okay, as a team, we're united. We want to understand each other's businesses. Previous places I've worked with, there was everyone had PhDs, and even in here in Clever Cards, a lot of people have PhDs. I don't, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be scared to go talk to these super intelligent people. I'm going to learn from them. So look at it as an opportunity to learn on both sides. And that's the way I hate the idea of a marketing class for finance people. Like, it should just be marketing class that anyone can go to, and marketing people can learn and finance people can learn. So it's just, I think it's really, for me, the cultural divide is probably an ignorant thing to have in place in any company nowadays. You have to be open-minded to different skills, what they can bring to the table. They may not always work, but it's worth giving it a try to learn and understand.
Yeah, I always say to my team and teams I've had over the years, it actually doesn't matter what discipline you come through or what track you come through, whether it's operations, marketing, product, technology, HR. You will eventually, if you want to progress in your career, you're going to eventually hit that line where you're going to need to have some kind of finance basics, because you're going to have responsibilities for budgets, for major targets that are all built around, basically anchored off the finance piece. You're going to have P&L responsibility. You might have cost center responsibility, and there's no getting away from that once you get to a certain level. So the sooner and earlier in your career that you put in an effort and time to familiarizing yourself with that, it makes all the difference. And look, there was a study done, and look, I'll do a shout out particularly for any of our women audience. There was a study done a number of years ago around this glass ceiling, and actually some of the statistics that came out was a lot of the reasons why men were getting into positions over women was because they seemed to have much more exposure and experience and understanding of the financial side of things. And a lot of that was just driven by kind of behavioral economics. It just was more the norm for men to look after the economics of the household, for instance, and that carried through then to work life. Now that's obviously that has changed a lot, but not significantly enough. So I would say to men and women out there who are looking to really grow in their marketing careers, really think about becoming familiar with just the language of finance, because it will really support you on your journey, and just be curious. I have to say, I've been incredibly impressed by our finance function at our company, Currency Fair. Like, the interest that the team actually take, they really want to understand how marketing does what they do. They genuinely do, but they don't often get asked or given the opportunity. So I would definitely say to people, put the hand out, reach out, whether it's a coffee over Zoom or go for a coffee in real life, and just have the chat, share stories. You'll be surprised how much you actually have in common in terms of what your day-to-day involves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, touching on just one or two of your points there, if we think about any company, whether they're reporting to their board or reporting to the stock market, whatever it might be, the facts of the matter are that the first reporting is going to be around performance, and that's going to be measured by whether it's profitability or cash, whatever, free cash flow, whatever it might be. They are the points that are going to measure or deemed to be measuring success. But I think more and more of the good boards that I've been part of and the good kind of investor information you see out there is around the investment profile and future stuff, the investment in that ESG world as well, and what they're doing outside of just the profitability figures. So I think if you base yourself in understanding those core concepts of free cash flow and operating profit, those kind of staples of a company, you can really add value in the rest of the business as to how we can improve product, how we can improve our market share, and how we can improve that ultimate customer's experience. So having that grounding in the base can only be a benefit for your career. The other thing on just women in the ceiling, I think it's it's incumbent on all of us just to make sure that we surround ourselves with the best people. And I know through my career, I have been fortunate to work with some of the best women through KPMG initially and throughout my jobs today. It's just been having that mix. It adds so much to the problem solving at the table. It's just, I don't think you can do it any other way nowadays.
Yeah, without a doubt. And look, I'll build on even just those basics of finance for marketers working in particular disciplines or functions within marketing. Even if you're in brand marketing, for instance, becoming familiar with what it means for around brand valuations. What does that actually mean in terms of public or private companies? You just need the top line basics, but become familiar with that and what that means from a finance and accounting perspective. Same if you are working more so on the digital marketing side, it means you're probably going to need to be much closer to, revenue growth, for instance. So, get familiar with revenue marketing and what the finance and economics are around that. Profitability, for instance, if that's the overall objective of the company, really look at what lifetime value is for customers and what the economics of that across the whole business. Because I do know in marketing, we tend to look at return on ad spend and, that very money in, money out in a very narrow marketing lens. But if you really think about it from the whole company perspective, that return on ad spend all of a sudden is a very different number. And even just being aware that that's the case will put you way ahead probably of a lot of marketers, depending on where you are in your career. So just pick a piece of the pie and become familiar with it, and that'll help just unlock probably the bit that's scary or and I'll be frank, Greg, boring. And I can say that as someone who's qualified as a management accountant, I can call it that, I think, but it can be. It's hard to motivate yourself as a marketer to get into those numbers and appreciate it and spend time. But
that's where I'd say if you're in a good position, if you're in a luxurious position where you can have someone from the finance team work with you on it. And that's what comes back to the partnership point for me. Like the customer acquisition, the cost of acquisition is such an important metric that everyone gets. Like everyone gets the CAC is an important thing compared to the LTV. So get your finance guys and girls involved to help you develop that and present the picture. So I think don't try and do it in isolation would be the point I try and say. Like if you're not getting the push from the finance team, pull them in.
Yeah. I'm actually going to move to the chat because we have some hellos from the likes of London, Manchester, Joburg, more London. So we've a nice international audience here, but we have some questions. One from Will. Has the shift to remote work made it more difficult to build those closer working relationships between different departments? How can you open up this two-way learning process without face-to-face contact? That's a great question.
Yeah, great question. Here we've all gone through a hell of a 2 years. I've joined a new company in the last 2 years, so I know this exact pain point. I think things like this, like me and Andrea have never met face-to-face, but yet, you can build a rapport with people by spending time getting to understand them on the webinars, on face-to-face in this mechanism. It is difficult. There are a lot of tools out there. I don't know, Andrea, if you guys are using any particular tools in your company that help the collaboration, but there are a lot more tools available to allow real-time communication and building that sense of camaraderie. But you do probably have to make the time to get to know people, not just put time in the diary to meet about an objective. Maybe put a bit of time in to get to know the person.
And that's the difference, right? It's not just about knowing what they do, but who they are as a person. Again, marketers, going back to that persona piece, with a customer, we'll always look at their professional pain points and their potential personal pain points. And it's the same, for internal partners as well. And if that, one thing we do at Currency Fair is every Friday, there's a half an hour session where a department would showcase something. Just could be anything that they're working on, something that they've delivered, something they're hoping to deliver, and everybody will attend this, and it'll be very much open forum Q&A. It's learning plus knowledge transfer plus just sharing updates. But the fabulous thing I have to say at Currency Fair is that there's just real safe place and friendly place for people to ask questions. And, you know, there's not a shyness to ask what might be perceived as a stupid question, because there are no stupid questions, as we know. But again, going back to the culture bit, you need to be able to create that friendly, questions are welcome, you know, we want a knowledge transfer internally situations. But that works really well. And obviously we record them so that there's a place that people can dip in and out and just catch up on different topics if they want. So it's actually very feasible to do these things with not a lot of time investment or cost. So actually, and a build on from that, next question from Monique. Have you got any advice for building interdepartmental relationships? So probably builds on from Will's question a bit. So aside from getting on Zoom and, you know, clinking virtual coffee glasses.
Yeah. I suppose in the new world we have now, like, you know, hopefully the world is opening back up. You know, I was able to do my first business international travel last week. So visiting an airport again was actually exciting. But I think in general, the interdepartmental relationships, you've mentioned a few things around kind of the lunch and learns have worked really well for us before, or the presentation by a team of what they're working on have worked really well. I know here in Clever Cards, like, we're building a lot of new product. So it's presenting the product and getting feedback from the finance team who may be users of the product. So building a sense of ownership in product is really useful. So sometimes you may not think of, and you touched on this already, Andrea, sometimes you may not think your finance team are users of the product that you're selling or what you're doing, but they most likely are. If you think of decisions that are going to be made in companies as to whether they're going to go ahead with something, it's normally someone in finance is going to be involved in that chain. So there's no harm in getting your own internal finance team to act as a quasi customer for you, to get their feedback on it. I think that can really help. It builds a sense of ownership in the external product that you're selling or service that you're selling. Yeah,
absolutely. And with that, it's also don't forget the flattery bit. You know, if you reach out to someone on the finance department and say, could you give me 15 minutes? I'd love for you to talk me through XYZ. I can tell you they would only be delighted that somebody wants to learn about what they do. Because I think it's very underappreciated a lot of the time, because it is not the cool, the sexy one. And oftentimes it doesn't get the same attention. This is a great one from Karina. How do you make the case around brand building or non-revenue creative marketing activities?
One, I'd say brand, like, there's value in brand. So, you know, where there's value being built or perceived built, there's value. There is external value. Okay, so the case for non-accretive revenue, I would link it back, for me personally, it's what is the company trying to achieve? What are the objectives of the company, and how does this project deliver on that objective of the company? If it's miles off course, well then, no brainer, I can't sign up to that. If you're saying, well, we're going to do this, it's not revenue, but it's going to create a halo effect for us, and a springboard comes in with another customer or whatever it might be, you can, as long as you link it to the objectives of the company, I think the case can be built. It doesn't necessarily have to have a bottom line, I'll reiterate that. But as long as it's shown to be linked to the objectives of the company and it's aligned with that, then the case can easily be made.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And going back
again, I wouldn't steer clear if it's non-revenue, just to be clear.
No, absolutely not. And again, even that bit around, you know, how are brands valued? If, you know, their book value is $500,000, let's go really small, but their actual overall business value is $1 million. What's creating that extra $500,000? It's going to be brand, some other kind of intellectual property, or patents if it's in your old pharma world, you know. So there's very you know, this is not something new that has been developed or designed. This is very traditional economics around valuation of businesses. So familiarize yourself with that terminology, that then you can spit back at whoever it is that's challenging and asking you about that spend on brand. And it's powerful. Again, understanding that and being able to reiterate it is very powerful. Next one then, they're coming in hot and fast. How can, and I can see we're going to get kicked off by someone coming in. Do we have time for a couple more?
You can squeeze one more in, I reckon, and yeah.
So actually, this is a good one. Wayne asks, how can marketing help finance understand marketing better? So how can we help you guys?
How can you help us, guys and girls? We can, here, talking to us, not being afraid to come and say hi, not being afraid to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is why we're doing it. Like, don't just tell us why, and how is it going to help the company. So like that, the jobs to be done methodology, kind of breaking it down into the pieces. This is why we're doing it, because first step of this, that's going to lead to this, it's going to lead to this. That simple language can really help a finance person understand the why a project has been proposed or has been done.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's one last question from Ella, which I really think we should answer for her. How do you approach different approaches to marketing budgeting? For example, a percentage of expected revenue dedicated to marketing for the year versus adjusting monthly based on fluctuations.
Yeah, here. I think there's going to be, this will be driven a lot by probably the individual CEOs and CFOs of each company. Personally, I'm more of a ground up kind of approach where just because you had a budget last year of X percent of revenue doesn't mean you're getting that next year. That's my personal approach. It's more, let's build out the projects. I want to link them to the objectives of the company. So I want to say, if we're going to deliver this next year objectives wise, what are the projects marketing need to do? And then I'll assign the budget. So it's more of a unified process is the way I personally run it. Other companies would just say, no, it's going to be this because that's the way it is. And it's every year is that. And that's fine. Yeah, and that works. But I think it comes back to probably a comment I've said earlier, the stage of the company as that. And then secondly, what I've just said there as well, for me personally, I think it works better having finance working with the marketing team, aligning to the objectives of the company and building a budget that way.
Super, appreciate the extra time.
No worries. Thanks a lot, guys. That was a great chat, and clearly everyone loved it with all the questions in the chat there. I have put Andrea's LinkedIn in the chat there, so I'm sure you can connect with her and send over any other questions if you have any, and she can share them with Greg. And yeah, thanks to everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Andrea and Greg for a great discussion there. And stay with us. We've got our next session up in just under 10 minutes. So, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.